Alright friends, if you are watching this video today, it is because you have been asked to rewrite the ERQ that was assigned to you earlier this week during seminar. There are a couple of reasons why you might be asked to rewrite this today. The first reason is because you may have scored a novice or apprentice on the assignment, and if you would like to see some specific feedback about your response, I've gone through everyone who has submitted the assignment and left some comments for you about things that you could have improved on. So that would be on slide 20 of the presentation that was posted on our seminar Google Classroom on Monday. So if you're confused about why you're in here, I would encourage you to go back and take a look at that. Another reason why you might be in here today is because maybe you just chose not to do this assignment. And in that case, you'll be doing it today instead of doing it earlier this week. The way this is going to work today is we're going to take a look at the question together. We're going to go back and look at the passages together. And we're actually going to write about half of this ERQ together as well. So on this page that I currently have on the screen, we're going to do the answer and the because, the E1 and the E2 together. I'll type it on the screen. All you have to do is follow along and write it on your paper. And then when this video is over, you're going to flip your paper over to the back. You're going to do your internal transition, E1, E2, and concluding sentence on your own. When you get that done, you're going to bring your paper to me. I'm going to look over it quickly. If it looks like you've included all the things that we talk about in this video, you are going to be finished with your rewrite. But on the other hand, if I notice that maybe you've left some things out or you haven't really done what you were supposed to do, I'm going to give you some feedback. I'm going to ask you to go to your seat. I'm going to ask you to make some changes. With all of that being said, make sure you have the paper that you see here on the screen, a copy of the passages, and a pencil, and we're going to jump in here and get started. First thing we need to talk about is the question that this ERQ was asking. It's up at the top of the page next to the directions. It says, select one of the women who spoke up. So there were 6 different ladies that you were asked to read about. You had to choose one of them. Then it says, explain what she fought for. What I noticed a lot of people do, or a lot of people did, was it looked like you read this and you stopped right there, because I had several responses that told me all about one of these ladies. But if you notice, the next word of the prompt says and, which means if all you did was tell me what that person fought for, you did not answer the question being asked, because it also says to tell about the personality traits that made her successful. The prompt goes on to say, explain your answer using at least 2 pieces of evidence from the text. So another common mistake that I saw some people make is I had several people who only gave me 1 piece of evidence, and the directions clearly tell us we need to have at least 2. And really, anytime you're using the ABE writing strategy, you should always have at least 2 pieces of evidence. All right, now we're going to switch gears and we're going to take a look at the text that you could have pulled from. When you did this the first time, you had a choice. You could have chosen any of these ladies to write about, but since we're doing some of this together today, I'm going to make that choice for you, and today we are going to be writing about Miss Ida B. Wells. So I want you to flip your copy of the text to her passage. It's on the very front, and we're going to read through this together. It says, as an African-American woman journalist living in the South, Ida B. Wells Barnett had her life threatened for the work she did. There's a couple of things that stand out to me here, even in the first sentence. It tells us that she was African American and that she was a journalist. A journalist is a person who reports on what's happening in the world. They often write like news articles about what they notice. It also tells me that she was living in the South, and by the way, we know that this was happening in the early 1900s, which was a time when African American people were not treated in a fair way. And it also tells me that she had her life threatened for the work that she did. She led a one-person campaign against lynching. If you don't know what lynching is, essentially lynching is when you had a mob of people, a group of people, who would enact violence on a person. Maybe they felt like that person had done something that they did not agree with. Sometimes people had to endure lynching just because that they were African American, and it typically involved forms of torture, and oftentimes those who faced the lynchings would be executed. So keep in mind that Ida B. Wells was an African American woman. She lived in the South where lots of lynchings were occurring to other African American people. So this was something that would have been very dangerous for her to report on. It goes on to say she did that by gathering stories, she studied the information, she produced facts and statistics, and she spoke about it. In 1909, she gave a speech to the newly created National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This awful slaughter presented hard facts about a subject that others refused to address publicly. So not a lot of people were talking about the issues of lynching at this time, but Miss Wells was very brave and bold and decided that she was going to be a person who would talk about it. Wells Barnett forced people to face the reality of the horrors of lynching, and she called on her listeners and the NAACP to do more to end it. Let's switch gears and go back to our response sheet. If we go back to the question, the first thing it asks us is what this person fought for. So we're going to state that Ida B. Wells Barnett was a journalist who fought to end lynchings in the South. Again, make sure that anything that I write or type on my screen, you are writing it on your paper. Several of you got this far and then you stopped. But remember, like we spoke about earlier, we have the word "and" here. So we also have to state the personality traits that made her successful. So I'm going to say she was, and then personality traits are like words that we could use to describe her. What kind of person was she? If we think about all the information we just learned about her, the fact that she was an African American woman living in the South, the fact that she reported on something that no one else wanted to talk about, the fact that she put her own life in danger, two words that I think describe her are brave and bold. So I'm going to say she was brave and bold because. Remember, when we are using the Abe writing strategy, we always need to start with an answer and a because. So here's where I am including my because. I have to tell why I think she was brave and bold. And I'm going to say this because she was an African American woman, like we've talked about, and had her own life threatened, but she refused to give up. So she was brave and bold because she was an African American woman. She had her own life threatened, but even though she had been threatened, she refused to give up. If you need to, you can, of course, pause the screen and take some time to write this. So let's recap what we've said. Ida B. Wells Barnett was a journalist who fought to end lynchings in the South. She was brave and bold because she was an African American woman and had her own life threatened, but she refused to give up. When we get into our E1 and our E2, our evidence needs to prove that she was brave and bold. So we have to go back to the text and we have to find a piece of evidence that shows that she was brave and bold. Since we have two E1s and two E2s, my advice would be to make your first E1 and E2 about how she was brave, and then your second E1 and E2 that you're going to do on your own here in a minute about how she was bold. Anytime you are citing evidence, a great way to start would be the text says, and then we have to use our quotation marks to show that what we're saying is not our words, it is the author's words. And so you'll have to refer back to the text for this. And I think a great piece of evidence would be where it talks about how she had her life threatened, because obviously if you have your life threatened and you continue to do the work, you're probably a very brave person. So I would say a great piece of evidence to use would be the very first sentence. As an African American woman journalist living in the South, Ida B. Wells Barnett had her life threatened for the work that she did. So that's the piece of evidence that I'm going to cite. Make sure as I type it that you are writing it on your paper. Again, feel free to pause the video if you need to. Now, after our E1, where we cite our evidence, we're going to get into our E2, where we explain our evidence. Remember, your E2s at a minimum, at the bare minimum, should be at least 2 sentences. Our E1s come from the text, but our E2s come from our brain. And so we should not be citing any evidence in our E2s. It should be all in our own words. And a great way to start your E2 would be, this evidence shows, and we have to explain, how does this evidence show that she was brave? So this evidence shows Ida's bravery because she herself could have been a target for lynching. Like we said earlier, a lot of the people who were targeted were African Americans, and she was an African American woman, so she herself could have been a target for lynchings. We are not done because our E2s need to be at least 2 sentences. So although she knew this, she continued her campaign despite the danger she faced. So her bravery is shown because even though she knew it was dangerous for her, she continued. And I think I'm going to add one more sentence here just to really show how brave she was. So I'm going to say, this demonstrates her immense bravery. You'd have to be a pretty brave person in order to continue doing something when you know it could literally end your life. As you move forward and you go to your second E1 and E2, you are going to focus on why Ida B. Wells was considered bold. Someone who is bold is willing to say things that other people are not willing to say. So when you go back to the text, look for some evidence that shows that Ida B. Wells was a person who was willing to do that. Again, when you get done, you are going to bring me your paper. I'm going to look over it. If it looks good, you're done for the day. Make sure that you cite your evidence correctly and that your E2 is at least 2 sentences long and it's written in your own words. If I notice that you've made some mistakes, I'm going to give you some feedback and ask you to do some more writing.